Welcome friends to the part 2 of our module on null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Now in this part we are going to discuss about the notion of statistical hypothesis and null hypothesis. What do you mean by research? Research is something like exploring the new knowledge or exploring the new dimension of existing knowledge, we call it as research. Any hypothesis is something like a proposition or assertion we make use of for concluding certain inference. What are the types of hypothesis? There are basically two categories, simple hypothesis and complex hypothesis. What do you mean by simple hypothesis? As the name itself indicates the meaning, it deals with two variables out of which one independent variable and one is dependent variable, or one is causing variable and another is affected variable. And in other terminology also, simple hypothesis, as the name, it is unambiguous and clear. Coming to the complex hypothesis, again the name itself indicates the meaning that when you are dealing with more than two dependent variables and more than two independent variables, that means causing variables are more than two and affected variables are more than two, then you are getting this type of hypothesis, which are, you call it as complex or mostly referred as composite hypothesis also. And another two categories are null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. What the meaning of it? Null, as the meaning is a neutral hypothesis. A decision maker should always base on a statement for verification which has to be neutral. He has to be considered as unbiased. So, any statement if you consider for impartial, then you call it as null hypothesis. Usually it is denoted with H naught, H0 is the suffix one. What do you mean by alternative hypothesis? Alternative hypothesis is something like inverse of null hypothesis. Other than null hypothesis, it is a complementary hypothesis of null hypothesis, we call it as alternative hypothesis. Coming to its needs and significance, what is this? It needs that statistical hypothesis is a statement which can verify the probability distribution of the parent population basing on the sample observations. So, sample observations are always trying to understand what is the population behavior. In that case, there is a probability distribution. That distribution we call it as that parent population's distribution, and we have to consider that in the statement, then only the process will be scientific. So, this is the need and the significance is considered as statistical hypothesis. So, testing is used to determine whether the results of data set is statistically significant. That means, it may have some mathematical difference, but this should have statistical significance. Now, what are the statistical types? We call it as statistical hypothesis types are null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Just now I have explained the meaning of null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis that comes under the category of statistical hypotheses. Now, simple hypothesis which predicts the relationship between a simple dependent variable, means a single dependent variable with a single independent variable, is a simple hypothesis. This hypothesis may deals with either parametric or non-parametric. What do you mean by parametric and non-parametric also I am going to explain. Simple hypothesis is the population mean. For example, a population mean of being tested in a university, there are two categories of students, male and female. I am assuming and I am proposing that average male student height is 175 centimeters of the Pondicherry University. So, if you say that phenomena, you can say according to the statement, this statement is so simple, it is unambiguous, which is parametric. It is simple hypothesis is parametric. Why? Because it is having number. Another one is non-parametric. What is that? This statement, if you see that smoking cigarettes daily leads to lung cancer, there is no number in this. but it is so simple. In that case, you call it as simple hypothesis, but it is non-parametric. Now, composite hypothesis, what the meaning is? It predicts the relationship between two or more independent variables and dependent variables. How it is? In description, it describes the relationship between the set of dependent variables may be more than 2 and the set of independent variables may be more than 2. In that case, a complication will be happened. I will explain through examples. The examples are, for example, drinking sugary beverages on daily basis or have a family history of health issues. These are the two variables where we can call it as dependent variables. Then the other variables, another set of variables are that leads to, if you take drink and sugary beverages, you may get overweight, you may get diabetes. And if you are having the family history of health issues, you may get overweight or you may get diabetes. That what it means that having the sugary beverages and having the family history, these two factors may influencing getting the overweight or diabetes. That means two variables are influencing two other variables. We cannot claim that it is one single variable is a causing variable to another single affected variable. So, if it is one way, then we call it as that simple hypothesis. If it is more than one variable, we call it as composite hypothesis. Now, what do you mean by parametric hypothesis? This parametric hypothesis is something like mentioning the statement with parameter. What the meaning is, it is a statistical hypothesis which assumes the sampling distribution is known and it follows a specific probability distribution. That means, the parent population is having specific probability distribution. So, there if you say a statement with the terms of parameters of the parent population or probability distribution, then you call it as the parametric hypothesis. It involves one or more assumptions about the underlying arrangements of values in the parent population from which the sample is drawn. And the types and examples of concern, there are basically 4 categories of parametric hypothesis. What are that? Null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, simple hypothesis and composite hypothesis. So, these 4 hypotheses we call it as parametric hypothesis. Wherever there is a number in the parametric, the hypothesis, then you call it as parametric. Wherever there is no number, simply attributes we are using, that are called non-parametric hypothesis. If you see this example or disclosure, null hypothesis, if H naught is mu equal to mu naught, this is a null hypothesis which is simple. That means, there is no ambiguity. Coming to the null hypothesis, mu is less than or equal to mu 0. What it means that it is less than or equal. If it is less, how much less we do not know. Similarly, coming to the left side, H naught says that mu greater than or equal to mu naught. If it is more greater than, then how much greater or how much more it is, we do not know. So, therefore, there you can consider it is a composite. Whenever there is an ambiguity, for instance, HA stands for alternative hypothesis, which was mentioned in the first category, mu is not equal to mu naught. What it means? The population mean is not equal to a given mean, where it is a possibility that it is either more than mu 0 or less than mu 0, there is an ambiguity. So, non-parametric hypothesis meaning wise, what the meaning is, as I mentioned, non-parametric, that means there is no parameter in the statement. Simply the characteristics or psychological traits are there in the hypothesis. As I said that the more you are exposing to the smoking, the more the health risk is there. Such type of things, there you are dealing with characteristics. So, non-parametric hypotheses are the experiments that do not require underlying population parameters. When you use parameter is a population constant which can be considered as a number. However, non-parametric means there is no need of having parameters. Now, hypothesis based on overall population only. If you are handling with one parameter, specific parameter, you can make it as one thing, or if it is not having, if you want to say what way it is total thing if you speak, that is also called non-parametric hypothesis. So, parametric hypothesis is more specific, non-parametric hypothesis is overall. So, examples wise if you consider, say there is a significant agreement between education levels and the behavioral manners. Educational levels is one characteristic or attribute or a quality. Behavioral manners is another quality. Both are not in numbers, they are simply characteristics. If you give a statement with these characteristics, you call it as non-parametric hypothesis. Similarly, there is no significant difference between two populations overall. There are two populations, two large consignments. If you wish to speak on both of them without non-specific to any specific parameter, then also you call it as non-parametric hypothesis. These are the examples. We can have the clarity on the non-parametric hypothesis. So far we have discussed about the part 2, in which I have given the explanation what are the types of hypotheses that are simply named as null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, simple hypothesis and composite hypothesis, parametric hypothesis and non-parametric hypothesis. These are all different types of hypotheses that we are making use in any decision making. So, therefore, this hypothesis is a constructive statement for any research verification. So, friends, in part 2 of the module, we covered the different sets of hypotheses, namely simple hypothesis and composite hypothesis, null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, parametric hypothesis and non-parametric hypothesis, with their framing, their significance, their importance, and also with examples. Thank you.